She stood near the back of the hallway, holding a worn music folder against her chest. The building was old, with pale walls and a floor that carried the sound of every footstep. People passed her again and again, some laughing, some practicing quietly, some walking with the kind of confidence that comes from being used to places like this. She stayed still, almost trying to blend into the wall behind her. This was not where she imagined she would be. In truth, she had imagined many times that she would never come at all. The idea of walking into a room full of judges and strangers had scared her for years. Even now, her hands felt cold, and her breathing was shallow. She kept telling herself to slow down, to stay calm, but her heart did not listen. She looked down at her shoes. They were clean but old, the kind that had been worn carefully to make them last longer. Everything about her felt small in this place. The hall was filled with people who looked like they belonged. Their clothes were new. Their voices were loud. Some of them spoke about concerts, teachers, and schools she had only heard about from far away. She did not speak to anyone. She never did in places like this. Talking made people ask questions, and questions often led to looks that made her feel out of place. So she waited quietly, listening, watching, and holding her folder a little tighter each time someone new walked by. A notice board on the wall showed the audition schedule. Names were written neatly in black ink. She searched for her own and found it near the bottom. Seeing it written there made her stomach twist. It was real now. She could no longer pretend this day would pass like any other. She had traveled a long way to get here. The journey began before sunrise, with a bus ride that felt endless. She remembered sitting by the window, watching the city slowly wake up. Shops opening, streets filling, people starting their day. She wondered how many of them were chasing something that felt impossible. Music had always been her quiet place. She did not grow up around big stages or trained performers. There was no one to tell her she was talented or special. There was only sound, simple and honest, filling small rooms late at night. She learned by listening, by repeating, by failing again and again when no one was watching. Her home was not silent, but music found its way in anyway. It lived in moments between noise and struggle. It lived in tired evenings and early mornings. She never thought of it as something that could take her somewhere. It was simply something that made life easier to carry. When she was younger, she used to play just for herself. Sometimes she played so softly that even the walls seemed to lean in to listen. Other times, she played louder, letting emotion she could not name flow through her hands. She never thought about being seen. She only thought about being honest. A door at the end of the hallway opened, and a voice called the next person inside. A confident figure walked past her, smiling, shoulders back. The door closed again. The sound of music followed, strong and clean, filling the hall for a brief moment before fading away. She swallowed hard. Each performance before hers made the weight heavier. She wondered if the judges would even remember her face. She wondered if they would already be tired by the time she entered the room. The thought made her chest feel tight. Someone nearby talked about how strict the judges were. Someone else laughed and said it did not matter because talent always showed. She wanted to believe that, but her life had taught her that talent was not always enough. Often, it was the quiet ones who were overlooked. She checked the folder again, even though she already knew what was inside. The pages were slightly bent at the corners. They carried marks from years of use. Every note on those pages had been practiced countless times. Still, doubt crept in. Doubt always did. She remembered the moment she decided to apply. It had been late at night. She was alone, scrolling through her phone, half asleep. The announcement appeared on the screen, simple and plain. An open audition. No age limit. No requirement to name a teacher or school. Just one piece of music. Her first thought was to ignore it. That was what she always did. But something inside her did not let her scroll past. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then, slowly, she filled out the form. When she pressed send, her hands shook. She told no one. Not because she wanted to hide it, but because she did not want to explain herself. Explaining always led to disappointment, either her own or someone else's. It felt safer to carry this hope quietly. The hallway grew quieter as the morning passed. Some people left, smiling or frustrated. Others arrived, fresh and eager. Time moved strangely, stretching and shrinking all at once. She lost track of minutes, then suddenly heard her number being called. For a moment she did not move. She wondered if she had imagined it. Then she realized people were looking at her. She nodded slightly, as if to convince herself, and began walking toward the door. Each step felt heavy. The closer she got, the louder her thoughts became. What if she forgot everything? What if her hands failed her? What if they stopped listening after the first few seconds? She paused in front of the door. The handle was cool under her fingers. She took a deep breath, one she had practiced many times at home, and pushed the door open. The room was larger than she expected. Bright lights hung from the ceiling. A long table sat at the front, with several people seated behind it. Their faces were calm, unreadable. Papers lay in front of them. Pens rested between their fingers. She stepped inside and closed the door gently behind her. The sound echoed more than she wanted it to. For a brief second, she considered apologizing, then stopped herself. She had learned that apologizing for existing only made things worse. One of the judges looked up and asked her to introduce herself. Her voice came out softer than she intended, but steady. She gave only the necessary details. Nothing more. Nothing that invited questions. Another judge asked about her background in music. She hesitated, then answered honestly. She had no formal training, no famous teachers, just years of personal practice. The words felt small as she spoke them. She noticed the slight change in their expressions. It was quick, almost invisible, but she had seen it before. A quiet lowering of expectation. A subtle shift in posture. They thanked her politely and glanced at their notes. She stood there, hands resting on the edge of the instrument, waiting for the next instruction. Her heart beat loudly in her ears. She wondered if they already had an idea of who would succeed today and who would not. One judge spoke again, mentioning the limited time and suggesting a simple piece to begin with. The words were kind, but the meaning was clear. They did not want to spend long on her. She nodded. She did not argue. She never argued. Inside, something tightened, but she pushed it down. She reminded herself that she had not come this far to walk away. She adjusted her seat and placed her hands where they needed to be. The room felt very still. She could feel every eye on her, waiting, judging, measuring. Before she played, she closed her eyes for just a second. In that moment, the room disappeared. The lights, the judges, the weight of expectation. All of it faded, leaving only her and the sound she knew so well. When she opened her eyes again, her hands were steady. Whatever happened next, she would play honestly. That was the only promise she had ever made to herself. The first note was about to be played. The room had no idea what it was about to hear. The judge smiled politely and gestured toward the music stand. He held a sheet of paper in his hand, a piece of paper that was meant to be easy, something that anyone with a basic skill could play. He spoke softly, almost kindly, telling her it was a simple song, short and familiar. The words were meant to comfort, but instead they made her stomach twist. Everyone assumed this would be easy for her, and that she would finish quickly. No one expected anything more. She looked at the sheet, the notes clear and simple. Her eyes traced the familiar shapes. She had played songs like this countless times in the privacy of her room. Her fingers itched to move, but her mind reminded her to stay calm, to respect the space and the expectations. She nodded slightly to the judge and took her seat. The room was quiet. The only sound was the soft scrape of her chair against the floor. She felt all eyes on her, and the weight of those eyes pressed down, heavier than the instrument in front of her. She closed her eyes for a moment, just a brief pause to breathe and to collect herself. The hall seemed to stretch in that silence. Each breath felt like it carried the tension of everyone present. She began with the first note. It sounded simple, almost plain, but her control made it speak differently. The note lingered longer than expected, as if it had a life of its own. The judges glanced up. Some eyebrows lifted, subtle, but noticeable. She did not look at them. She was not playing for their approval. She was playing for the song itself. For the music that had carried her through quiet nights and long days. Her fingers moved naturally, almost instinctively. Every note was placed with care, but she added small variations, flourishes she had discovered herself. They were not in the sheet music, and they were not meant to be. There were moments of her own voice shining through the simplicity. The song began to feel richer, deeper, and somehow more alive than it had on paper. The judges sat up straighter. One of them leaned slightly forward, curious. The room felt different now, as if the air had shifted. Every subtle movement of her hand seemed to draw attention, and the sound filled the space with something unexpected. People who had been chatting quietly stopped. Even the faint hum of the ventilation seemed to fade into the background as she played. She remembered all the nights she had spent practicing. Small rooms, no audience, no one to notice. She remembered the evenings when she had felt invisible, when her only companions were the soft notes and her own determination. Every struggle, every moment of doubt flowed through her fingers now, giving the simple song weight and depth that was impossible to ignore. The judges exchanged glances. They had given her an easy song, expecting a routine performance. Instead, the room was filled with emotion. The song had transformed. What was meant to be simple now carried layers of feeling that no one had anticipated. The simplicity became her canvas, and she painted on it with years of quiet effort and unseen talent. Her body moved with the rhythm without thinking. She leaned slightly into the keys, feeling each note resonates through her. Every pause, every subtle rise and fall in tempo was intentional. She did not play for applause. She played because it was her language, her way of speaking without words. The song was no longer just notes. It was a story, her story. Quietly unfolding before everyone present, a small smile appeared on one judge's face. Almost imperceptible, quickly replaced with concentration. They were trying to process what they were hearing, to understand how a simple song could carry such weight. Another judge's pen hovered over a sheet of paper but did not write. Words seemed unnecessary. Music spoke louder than any comment could, some of the other candidates. Waiting outside the room had begun to peek through the small windows in the door. They had been confident in their own abilities, expecting this easy song to be just a warm-up. Now, faces pressed to the glass, they watched in disbelief. The quiet girl, the one they had assumed would pass unnoticed, was filling the room with something extraordinary. She reached a section in the music that was usually played quickly, almost mechanically, but she slowed it, letting the notes stretch, letting each one resonate in the silence. The hall seemed to listen. She could feel it, the way the energy in the room shifted from casual observation to focused attention. The music became a bridge connecting her to everyone there, even though they had expected nothing. Time felt different. Seconds stretched and contracted with each note. She lost herself in the song. She was not thinking about the judges, not thinking about approval or recognition. She was playing the song as she had always played it, with honesty and depth. Each chord carried pieces of her life, pieces of quiet determination that no one had seen before. The judges were quiet, but their eyes followed every movement. Their initial assumption of simplicity, of a routine performance, had dissolved. The song was no longer easy. It was alive, expressive, and commanding attention. They could feel the skill, the subtle artistry, and the emotional connection. The transformation was silent but undeniable. She noticed small movements, small signs of attention. A judge's pen paused mid-note. Another leaned back slightly, hand resting thoughtfully on a chin. They were listening in a way they had not intended to. This was no longer a test of skill alone. It was a moment of recognition, of understanding that talent does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, surprising everyone. Her mind drifted briefly to her journey here. The quiet practices at home. The times she had questioned herself. The moments she had felt invisible. All of it converged in this song, making it more than just a simple piece of music. She played with care, precision, and emotion that could not be taught in lessons or described in words. It simply existed within her. As she approached the end of the song, Her confidence grew. She was no longer anxious. She was fully present, fully alive within the music. The notes became her voice, her story. She did not rush. She let the song conclude naturally, each final note lingering just long enough to leave an impression. When she lifted her hands at the very end, the room was silent for a heartbeat. No one moved, no one spoke. The song had ended, but its presence lingered. The judges looked at her, expressions a mix of astonishment, curiosity, and respect. They had expected an easy performance, and instead, they had witnessed something unforgettable. She took a slow breath, feeling the tension release. Her heart still raced, but it was a different kind of excitement now. Not fear, not doubt, but a quiet satisfaction. She had shared her music honestly, and the room had listened. That alone felt like victory. The judge who had handed her the sheet smiled, this time a little more openly. "Thank you," he said simply, and it carried more weight than any compliment could. It was acknowledgement, recognition of something deeper than the simple notes on the paper. She nodded, still catching her breath, still feeling the echoes of the music in the room. She knew she had changed the way they saw her in those few minutes. No one would forget this performance, not because it was flashy or difficult, but because it was true. As she stood and gathered her folder, the other judge asked quietly about her training, her experience, her story. She answered simply, truthfully, telling only what mattered. The room listened, this time with genuine interest, because they had realized that real skill was not always easy to spot. She left the room slowly, walking past others who were still waiting their turn. Some looked confused, some impressed, some silently thoughtful. She did not need their approval. She had already done what mattered. The song had spoken for her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt seen. The room was quiet after she finished playing. The notes had faded, but the sound seemed to hang in the air, like it refused to leave. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. It was as if time had paused, allowing everyone to feel what had just happened. The song had been simple, yes, but it had carried something far greater than anyone had expected. The judges looked at each other, trying to make sense of what they had just heard. Their expressions were a mixture of surprise and admiration. They had given her an easy song because they assumed it would be quick and unremarkable. They had underestimated her. Now, they realized that talent could hide behind quiet faces and small gestures. She sat still, holding her hands over the instrument, waiting. She felt the heat in her cheeks and the lingering rush of adrenaline in her chest. Her heart was still racing, but in a different way than before. This was not fear or doubt. It was a quiet satisfaction, a recognition that she had done what she had come to do. One judge cleared his throat and spoke, his voice soft but steady. He asked how she had learned to play like that. The question was simple, but the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for an answer that would explain what no sheet music could. She smiled faintly and told the truth. She had learned mostly by herself, through years of practice and listening to music whenever she could. She had played for no one but herself and had slowly built her skill through patience and persistence. The judges nodded slowly. They had expected a story of formal training, lessons, competitions, and teachers. Instead, they heard of quiet rooms, long nights, and personal dedication. It was a story that did not need grandeur. It carried its own weight. It explained the depth they had just heard in the simple song. Her performance had done more than surprise them. It had shifted the energy in the room. Where there had been polite attention, there was now genuine respect. The song had given her a presence, one that could not be ignored. The judges scribbled notes, not about technical mistakes, but about subtle artistry, emotional interpretation, and expressive detail. The candidate next in line, who had been waiting outside the room, now paused as she watched through the glass window. Confidence wavered in their eyes. They had thought this audition would be easy, that this quiet girl would slip by without notice. Now they could see that talent was not always obvious. It could be understated, hidden, still powerful. She noticed this out of the corner of her eye, a fleeting moment that reminded her of her own journey. How often had she been underestimated? How often had people overlooked her because she did not announce herself? She did not feel pride. She felt gratitude that, for once, the music had done the speaking. A judge asked another question, wanting to understand more about her approach to music. She explained how she paid attention to every note, every pause, every silence in between. Music was not just about speed or accuracy. It was about feeling, about connection. She believed that a song could carry meaning beyond the notes themselves, if played with care and honesty. The judges exchanged glances again, this time with a subtle smile. They were realizing that what they had witnessed was rare. It was not just skill, it was insight. It was the ability to make something simple, extraordinary. Their initial judgment of the piece as easy now seemed inadequate. The song had become a reflection of her talent, her patience, and her understanding of music itself. Outside the room, whispers began to form among the waiting candidates. Some spoke of astonishment. Others expressed curiosity. A few were quiet, as if trying to process what they had just seen. Her performance had not only affected the judges, it had rippled outwards, influencing everyone who had caught a glimpse. She could feel the weight of that influence, but she did not let it distract her. Her attention remained calm, centered on the music that had just finished. It had been a passage, a moment that she had carried with honesty and integrity. The room had received it. That was enough. One judge finally spoke again, complimenting her on the subtlety and depth she had brought to the song. He mentioned that the piece was often played mechanically, without thought, but she had made it breathe. She had turned simplicity into expression, and that was a rare talent. The words were kind, but they also carried respect and acknowledgement. She thanked them quietly, feeling a sense of completion. The song had been played, the performance had been shared, and the message had been understood. Her journey up to this point, all the small invisible hours of practice, had culminated in this room. The quiet girl no one expected much from had transformed the expectations of everyone present. As she gathered her folder and prepared to leave, she reflected on the process. The ease of the song had been deceptive, yes, but it had also been an opportunity. It had allowed her to show what could not be measured by difficulty. She had taken something simple and infused it with honesty, patience, and skill. That was the kind of impact she valued. The judges continued to make notes, still murmuring softly to themselves. They were thinking about the unexpected depth, the artistry, and the quiet confidence she had shown. They knew that such a performance was rare, that it would be remembered. It was not about the technical challenge of the music. It was about what she had brought to it. She walked slowly toward the door, sensing the shift in the room. Other candidates looked at her differently now. Even the most confident among them had a new awareness. Talent did not announce itself with loud gestures. It did not need applause to exist. It could arrive quietly, with skill and heart, and still leave an unforgettable impression. She opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The bustle of waiting candidates, the sound of footsteps, and the quiet murmurs of conversation surrounded her. But she felt calm. She had played with honesty, shared her music, and left her mark. That was all she had hoped to do. As she walked down the hall, she realized that something had changed. Not just the way the judges saw her, but the way she saw herself. She had always known her own ability, but now, in the presence of others, she had proven it. Quiet determination had transformed a simple song into something unforgettable. The hallway stretched ahead, familiar and yet new. She had come here expecting a test, a challenge, and perhaps disappointment. Instead, she had found validation, acknowledgement, in a moment of true expression. Her hands were still slightly trembling from the performance, but it was no longer fear. It was the echo of something she had given fully, without compromise. Even as she left, whispers of her performance continued. They spoke in soft tones, full of astonishment and admiration. The quiet girl had spoken without words, had shared her story through music, and had changed perceptions in a single performance. It was a moment she would carry with her forever, a reminder of what was possible when talent and honesty met in perfect harmony. The silence after her final note was heavy and complete. No one clapped, no one spoke, and even the small noises of the room seemed to have stopped. It was a silence full of awe, a quiet recognition that something extraordinary had just occurred. The easy song she had been given now felt transformed, as if it had carried the weight of her life into the room. Everyone in the space felt it, even if they could not yet name it. The judges were the first to regain composure, though slowly. One rubbed a hand across his face, eyes still fixed on her. Another sat back, letting out a soft, almost imperceptible sigh. They had expected a performance that was simple and forgettable. Instead, they had witnessed artistry, control, and emotion woven into something that had seemed ordinary at first glance. The quiet girl had taken a song meant for practice and made it speak. She remained seated for a moment, hands hovering above the instrument, letting the final resonance fade completely. Her breathing was calm now, steady. She felt the weight of the room's attention, but did not let it shake her. She had played for herself, and in doing so, she had let the music carry her story. That story had landed in the room like a gentle wave that left a mark on everyone it touched. One of the judges finally spoke, his voice soft, almost tentative. He asked her how she approached the song, what she thought about while playing. She answered simply, without hesitation. She spoke of listening, of feeling each note, of paying attention to the spaces between notes as much as the notes themselves. She explained that music was not just notes on a page, but an expression of emotion, of experience, of life itself. She did not embellish her words. They were plain, honest, and enough. The judges exchanged glances. Their initial impression had been overturned completely. The simple song had been meant to measure ability, to test skill without challenge. Yet it had become a canvas for subtlety, expression, and artistry that could not be contained by difficulty or page numbers. They recognized that they had been hasty in their assumptions, and now looked at her with genuine interest and respect. Outside the room, candidates who had been waiting quietly now murmured to one another. They had seen her enter and exit, had caught glimpses of her playing, and felt the shift in the atmosphere even from a distance. Some whispered questions about who she was and how she had learned to play like that. Confidence had faltered in a few of them, replaced by curiosity or quiet wonder. The quiet girl had unsettled expectations everywhere, not with loud gestures, but with presence and mastery. Back in the room, a judge leaned forward and asked about her training. She explained simply that she had not received formal lessons for most of her life. She had learned by listening, practicing, repeating, and refining in private spaces where no one was watching. She spoke about determination and the quiet hours of practice that no one ever witnessed. Her words carried the weight of truth and experience, and they resonated more than any technical explanation could have. The judges listened intently, scribbling notes, nodding occasionally. They were not evaluating errors or accuracy. They were evaluating depth, intention, understanding, and presence. The kind of musicality that cannot be taught, but can only be cultivated over time with patience, dedication, and honesty. They had been given a simple song to assess her skill, and had instead been reminded of the power of music to reveal character and soul. She stood and gathered her folder slowly, aware of every glance and every movement in the room. Some of the judges were still writing, still thinking, still processing. They were not just judging her performance. They were acknowledging the rare quality she had revealed. The music had spoken louder than any explanation could, and now they were grappling with how to express that understanding. Outside, some candidates whispered among themselves. The room beyond the door had been filled with anticipation and expectation, but it now carried a different energy. The quiet girl, who had seemed so unremarkable at first, had changed the mood entirely. Respect, admiration, and disbelief mingled in the air. Her performance had unsettled assumptions, changed perspectives, and left a quiet impression that lingered even beyond the door. The judges called her back briefly, asking a few more questions, wanting to understand her approach further. She answered simply, honestly, without trying to impress. She spoke about the emotion she put into her playing, about listening closely to the sound she produced, about valuing patience and subtlety over showiness. Her answers were unembellished but powerful because they were truthful. They asked her what she hoped to achieve in her music. She replied that she wanted to play honestly, to express what could not always be put into words, and to touch the listener's heart. She did not mention recognition or applause. She mentioned connection and sincerity. Her answer was quiet, but the impact was profound. It explained everything about the way she had played, about why the simple song now seemed extraordinary. One judge nodded slowly, a small smile forming. He explained to the others that the beauty of her performance was in its honesty. She had taken something straightforward and infused it with her own understanding, her own life, and her own feelings. That transformation could not be measured by speed, complexity, or difficulty. It was something deeper, something permanent. He suggested they make a note to remember this audition, to remember her name, because performances like hers were rare. She left the room finally. Walking into the hallway where the next candidates were waiting, she did not speak to anyone, though some stared at her, curious and silent. She had no need to explain or to assert herself. Her music had done that for her. The room, the judges, and even the other candidates had witnessed something authentic and unforgettable. Her hand still trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the intensity of the experience. She felt a quiet pride, but it was not a pride that sought validation. It was a satisfaction of having expressed herself fully, having honored the music, and having remained true to her own voice. That satisfaction was deeper than any praise could offer. As she walked down the hall, she thought about the simplicity of the song she had played. What had been intended as easy and unremarkable had become a stage for depth and emotion. It reminded her that expectation often underestimated the quiet ones. Those who worked without notice, who practiced in private, who developed skill and artistry without audience or applause. Her performance had revealed that truth to everyone in that room. The whispers followed her out of the audition room, soft voices that spoke of surprise, admiration, and reflection. They were not loud enough to reach her, but she could feel their presence. She knew she had left an impression that could not be erased. The music had carried more than notes. It had carried intent, patience, life experience, and sincerity. That was something the judges, the candidates, and the room itself could not forget. As she reached the exit, she paused for a moment, letting the experience settle in. The day had begun with nerves, with uncertainty, and with quiet fear. Now it ended with a sense of accomplishment, calm, and connection. She had played a song meant to be easy, and she had left it transformed. The silence that had followed her final note had been the room's way of acknowledging something rare, something true. Even after she stepped outside, the feeling lingered. The notes, the pauses, and the subtle expression had left an invisible mark. The room had listened, had absorbed, and had remembered. She walked away quietly, carrying her folder, carrying her satisfaction, carrying the knowledge that her music had spoken louder than anyone expected. She stepped out of the audition building and into the sunlight, letting the warmth touch her face. For a long moment, she just stood there, breathing deeply, feeling the day around her. The streets were busy, people walking with purpose, some talking, others lost in their own thoughts. It was ordinary, familiar. Yet everything felt different after what had just happened inside. Her performance had ended. But its impact was still alive, lingering in the quiet halls she had left behind. The judges had been stunned, the other candidates impressed and reflective. She had walked into the room with nerves and uncertainty, and walked out having changed perceptions without a single word, without any showiness. Her music had spoken for her. As she walked home, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The quiet evenings at the piano, the hours of practice without recognition, the mistakes she had made and corrected on her own. Every note she had played today carried that history. Every pause, every subtle touch of the keys told a story of dedication, patience, and honest effort. She had learned long ago that talent alone was not enough. Perseverance, sincerity, and love for the craft were what truly mattered. She remembered how many times she had felt invisible, overlooked, or underestimated. Today had been different. Today she had not only played music, she had left a mark. Even without knowing it, she had given the room a glimpse of what quiet determination could achieve. That recognition, however small, was deeply satisfying. Later, as she returned to her small apartment, she replayed the audition in her mind. Not the technical details of the song, but the feelings, the energy, the way the room had shifted as she played. She thought about the expressions on the judges' faces, the quiet fascination of those who had watched from outside the door. Each reaction had been a reminder that honesty and sincerity could shine brighter than any flash of showmanship. She opened her music folder, carefully placing it on the table. The pages were familiar, worn from years of use, but today they seemed different. They were no longer just notes. They were a testament to her journey, her choices, her dedication. She traced her fingers lightly over the lines, remembering the way each note had resonated, the subtle variations she had added, the moments when she had let her heart guide her hands. Rather than just the written music, her mind drifted to the idea of recognition. She did not play for awards or applause, but acknowledgement felt validating. Today, she had received something far more meaningful than a trophy or praise. She had received understanding, genuine appreciation, and the rare acknowledgement of a skill that came quietly but with depth. That kind of recognition was lasting, and it mattered more than any fleeting applause. She thought about her future. The audition had opened a door, though she did not know where it would lead. Opportunities might come, invitations to perform, perhaps even lessons or mentorships from those who recognized her potential. She felt ready to accept them. But she also knew that nothing would replace the importance of staying true to her own path, her own approach to music, and her own voice. The evening light spilled across the room as she sat quietly, reflecting. She realized how much she had grown, not just as a musician, but as a person. Today had been a test, not just of skill, but of patience, courage, and authenticity. She had faced a room full of expectations, assumptions, and scrutiny. And she had responded not with bravado, but with honesty. That was something she could carry forward forever. She thought about the people who had doubted her, or who had underestimated her in the past. She did not feel anger or resentment. Instead, she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had proven something, not through confrontation, but through action. Music had done the speaking, and it had been heard. The subtle triumph of honesty and effort was far sweeter than any outward recognition could be. Night fell, and she looked out of her window at the city below. Lights flickered in homes and streets and buildings where countless stories were unfolding. She felt connected to all of it, a small part of a much larger tapestry. Her music, her practice, her effort, and her courage were threads in that tapestry, now woven in a way that had left an impact on others. As she prepared for bed, she thought about the lessons she had learned. First, that talent is only part of the story. Second, that perseverance, patience, and sincerity create resonance that no audience can ignore. Third, that quiet effort can often speak louder than showy displays. And fourth, that sometimes the simplest actions can leave the deepest impression. She closed her eyes, letting the day settle around her. She felt calm, proud, and ready for what came next. Tomorrow might bring more challenges, more auditions, more moments of uncertainty. But she had learned that she could face them with honesty and courage, and that was enough to create something extraordinary. In her heart, she knew that her journey was far from over. She had many more songs to play, many more moments to express herself, and many more opportunities to leave her mark in quiet, meaningful ways. Today had been proof that her dedication mattered, that her music could touch people in ways beyond expectation, and that even the quietest voice could be heard. She drifted to sleep with a sense of completeness, knowing that she had given her best, had shared her truth, and had left an indelible impression on those who had listened. The easy song had become extraordinary, not because it was hard, but because of the honesty, heart, and skill she had brought to it. And that was a triumph she would carry with her forever.